I like Rolled. He's funny.
He's ride or die.
He's a ride or die, like a meal.
I was going to say like a meal. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's real Emil energy.
Meet Sara and Samantha.
Two cousins obsessed with exploring the vast pop culture landscape, one recommendation at a time.
In each episode, one clueless cousin shares real-time reactions as they navigate the twists and turns of a pop culture topic selected by the other.
From travel to movies,
Little Debbie's to trashy novels.
Get ready to eavesdrop on the candid reactions and dynamic conversations you can only have with family.
This is Foreign and Familiar.
Welcome to Foreign and Familiar. I am Samantha.
And I'm Sara.
Hi, Sara. How are you doing today?
Sam. I'm doing great.
We're in season 2. There are some different things we're doing this year. One of them is video. And at some point, I feel like I will realize that I am wearing over-the-ear headphones, so I don't need to bother with earrings because no one can see them.
I have the same thought every time we record. I do the same thing while traveling. If I'm on a long flight, I'll use over-the-ear headphones because they're just a little more comfortable. And at some point, I just decided don't travel with earrings in, put them in later. So advice for our listeners, if you haven't figured it out already, if you're wearing over-the-ear headphones, whether that's recording or traveling, just don't bother with the earrings.
Speaking of things that our listeners should know at this point in time from tuning into Faux Fam Pod, podcasting is always sweeter with a snack. And Sara and I are obsessed with Little Debbie snack cake. Sara, what are we reviewing today?
Today we are throwing it back to one that I remember and I haven't had for a while, but I was super excited to try again. It is the strawberry shortcake roll. This is a yellow cake rolled with layers of cream and strawberry flavored fruit filling.
Nice summery strawberry flavor, very strawberry delicate flavor. Mm-hmm. I had never had one of these before. We tried it just for this podcast, which is weird because everybody else in my family, when I said, oh, I haven't had one, my parents, my twin brother, all that, they say that these are staple in their houses. So I was excited to really dig in. I like this one. I tend to not like yellow cake. We've covered that pretty extensively, but this is where the amount of jelly is really consistent and enough for me. I know we've talked about jelly flavors, and the cream also works on this as well. So I would absolutely take this one over the jelly cream pie any day of the week. I didn't miss the chocolate at all.
I agree. I would use the term refreshing to describe this within the scope of Little Debbie. So it was enough of a change from their usual cake format that it was a nice change. And I feel like the icing with the strawberry cream ratio to the cake was good. It kept everything moist. So I'm a huge fan. I remember, and I don't know if this is just my child brain and how it worked, or if this was like actually the case, but I remember one of the first times that I had these, I think it was right around the time where strawberry shortcake was kind of like the character was kind of getting a little bit of a revival. They were doing like a show. There were more toys that were strawberry shortcake focused. She was kind of making a reappearance. And I feel like this was, I remember boxes of the rolls with strawberry shortcake's picture on them. And I think it stuck. So that I have no evidence that that is the case, but I feel like that's the connections that I made the first time I had it and have just kind of always associated it with that.
Well, I think when you really think about it, us as young women have been brainwashed to love strawberry shortcake. No, I'm kidding. I'm just joking. I would have told you if you would have asked me, I would have bet that these were relatively new within the past 5 years. So I clearly am on the outside of this one. I can't weigh in on how long it has been around, but I would agree with you. It's light, it's easy, it's a little snack, and I think it's wonderfully worth the calories. I don't know that it would be a staple that I would absolutely, every time I see it, I would pick up. But I think seasonally in the summer, if I saw these on the shelf, I'd grab a pack. I'd grab a box for sure.
Absolutely, I agree. I just looked it up and I found online that the strawberry shortcake rolls were first introduced in the 1960s. So I was completely wrong in my child brain connections that I made. But they were originally called gel cream rolls, and it looks like they did not have the layer of cream on the bottom, and they have since been rebranded.
Well, first of all, I just want to affirm you. That doesn't mean that they didn't do some sort of licensing partnership with Strawberry Shortcake in the 90s. I guess also I don't understand. These are basically Swiss rolls, but without chocolate over them. And so when they say a layer of cream at the bottom, what is at the bottom? It's rolled up with the jelly, yeah?
Right, but it's like when you take it out, there's like that layer on the bottom.
I guess
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like this, again, to go back, it's like the Swiss rolls where you get the little cream and the little bits that are left on the plastic or on the paper cardboard.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say this is, I would say I like it, but I'm relatively kind of indifferent to it. Mm-hmm. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, except I would lean towards pleasant. It was pleasant. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I usually when I'm buying Little Debbie's, I am in search of something that's chocolate. So these are never my go-to, but I definitely enjoy them when I have them.
So strawberry shortcake reminds me of summertime. And you know what else reminds me of summertime, Sarah?
What's that?
Summer darts.
Oh, good old summer darts.
So segue into our topic on what we're talking about today. This is going to be a fun one.
It is. I'm so excited.
Sarah, what are we talking about today?
Well, pitter patter, let's get at her. We are talking about the Canadian sitcom Letterkenny today.
Sarah, this is one you picked. You were the familiar, I was the foreign. So let's start with some of our questions here. Why did you recommend this and why did you think I would like it?
Well, Sam, I remember showing you a clip of Letterkenny where some of the characters were doing their best imitation of the sounds that porn stars make in porn movies. And I do remember you finding that funny. So I thought maybe you would enjoy the rest of the show as well. Some things that I really like about it that I wanted to share: lots of witty banter, lots of quick thinking, and really complex conversations written into the show. And also just some quick wit, funny characters, some relatable characters. So overall, this works for me on a lot of levels, and I wanted to share that.
I do like this one because I think similar to what we do in the shadows, but to a completely different level on this one. This, as it being your recommendation, puts your filth flag right out front and center for people. And again, I think filth is, it's subjective. I don't think that this is filthy. Mm-mm. I do think that it's raunchy, or I do think that it's crass, let's say. But I don't think it's offensive. I just think that they're talking about a bunch of different things. And I know we're going to go in and dissect a little bit more. Sarah, for our listeners that may not be familiar with Letterkenny, what are some of the cultural notes, canon notes that people need to know if they're anticipating this for the first time, or if they're getting ready to explore this title for the first time?
So Letterkenny, as I said, is a Canadian sitcom. It was written by Jared Keeso and Jacob Tierney, who play two of the main characters in the show that we can get into later. It is about a small Canadian town and the different groups of people who live in that town. The Skids, the Hicks, the Christians, the hockey players, the Mennonites, and how they all interact with each other within this very small town. Like most sitcoms does tend to follow a little bit of a format. So we have the cold open. We usually start at the produce stand, which we can talk about a little bit later. And then some of the other groups will get involved with the main cast. This is a pretty highly nominated. It won the 2017-2018 WGC Screenwriting Awards for Best Comedy, Best Comedy Directors, Best Writing, and then later Best Direction and Best Writing. So over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years that it's been on, it has been consistently nominated or won in a variety of categories for the creation of this show.
Another thing that I think is important to note is that there are 12 seasons of Letterkenny. What I was pleased to see is that they're relatively short seasons, 6 to 8 episodes a season. I initially had thought that there were going to be 12 to 20 episodes a season. So I think before we head into break, Sarah, knowing that this has been highly acclaimed, there's a lot of source material, how to get started here. Can you talk a little bit for our listeners about how you went about introducing me to the world of Letterkenny and how we're going to have this conversation? Because I did not watch all 12 seasons.
Of course, that would have been quite a task. Plus, if you're going to watch all 12 seasons of Letterkenny, then we would have to throw in Letterkenny, which is a short cartoon series about the main cast as their kids. And then you could also throw in Shoresy, which we could get to later. So it becomes its own beast at a certain point. So for this episode of our podcast, I chose 10 episodes for Sam to watch. I was really happy that the show has ended and the final season is out, because one of the things that I really like, and one of the things we can get into later, is how many references to season 1 were in the last season, in particular the last episode. And I feel like it was a really great way to round everything out and end the show. So in order to give Sam the context, I had her watch all of season 1, which is 6 episodes, the last episode of season 12, which is the last episode of the show forever, as far as we know.
Also known as the series finale, series finale.
Yes. Series finale, yes.
Yes.
For the other 3 episodes, there were a couple of things that I wanted her to see. First of all, I wanted her to meet the Dicks, which is the Mennonite family that lives in Letterkenny, with all the jokes that come around their names and how they interact with everyone. I wanted to see her to see a really good example of the banter and some of the conversations the characters have. So I recommended the first episode of season 11, which is Chips. And also in the last season, there is a highlight on the conflict between most of the people in Letterkenny and the Degens. So I did include an episode for her to kind of see that conflict, to give some context for the last episode.
I think, Sarah, we're going to kick it to break and come back and start exploring about, and I'm not saying this sarcastically at all, the rich world of Letterkenny. I think over 12 seasons, as you've picked, just as a viewer, it was great to watch the first season, understand the characters, get the motivations, but it was cool to also then have some of these additional episodes that I was watching be so many seasons later. Like you said, there's one in season 6, there's a couple in 11, there's the series finale. And so I just think you did a great job of picking that, because as a viewer, I could see how the production increases, how the world increases, how they really dig into those characters over the time. So I'm looking forward to chatting about it on the other side of the break.
Yeah, I'm excited. We'll talk when we come back. We are back from break, and today we are talking about Letterkenny. Sam was assigned 10 episodes to watch, so we're going to go ahead and get into everything. With Letterkenny, if you're not familiar, one of the most important things to know is which of the groups the characters belong to. So at the beginning of the show, they really highlight the fact that there are the Skids, the Hicks, the Christians, the hockey players, and how those groups interact with each other. Most of the main cast is made up of the Hicks. So we have Wayne, Squirrely Dan, Daryl or Derry, and Katie, who is frequently called Katie Cat. So those 4 are, I would say, are who we follow for the majority of the show, and they make up the group that is considered the Hicks. So let's start with Wayne, Sam. He is the main character in most respects of the show. He is played by Jared Kiso, who was one of the show writers and creators. So thoughts on Wayne?
I like Wayne, he spends most of the first season, if not the whole series, I'm not sure, proving that he's the toughest guy in Letterkenny. He's a fighter. He's a farmer. I think what's really interesting, and I think this kind of goes in general with the Hicks, is that it subverts this trope that farmers are stupid or not locked into pop culture, don't have opinion on some of the minutiae and some of the details there. So I think that Wayne is very sharp, very tough, and just kind of maybe a salt of the earth type of guy.
Yeah, I would say he's definitely an authority figure in Letterkenny. People usually go to him for advice or his opinion or some sort of recognition or approval. So he's definitely an authority figure within the community. Following Wayne would probably be his sister, Katie.
So I think that she is sweet. Mm-hmm. She's a sweet person. When Stuart from the Skids has his rave in the first season, she's one of the only ones to show up. She sticks up for him when that woman just absolutely tears him down. She kicks her right in the vajayjay, you know? Her and Wayne together have a really nice bond and relationship. So I like her. That being said, she never has her clothes on, in the sense of always wearing a bikini. And I know that that's a running gag in the first season of put your clothes on, and she says no. And she's beautiful. The actress is absolutely beautiful. But I actually have a note here later in the series on the episodes I watched where it says it seems like they move away from that and she has some more clothes on. So I like her as a character, but I like when they kind of drop that gag. I know what they're going for, that's the running gag, that she's just so hot that she never has to have her clothes on, XYZ. And I'm not saying that in the other season she goes and has like a burqa and stuff on. She still has cut off shorts and a tank top. But yeah, I think when she gets the opportunity to shine and be in the center, she's a highlight of the show.
I think so too. I think in the first two seasons in particular, her role is more so focused on being like a puck bunny for Riley and Jonesy, and she definitely moves away from that in the later seasons of the show. Speaking of people who are attracted to Katie, we have Squirrely Dan, who has lots of things that he appreciates about Katie.
I thought he was okay. He pluralizes everything he says.
He does. I know I said that he has a lot of things he appreciates about Katie. So the way he would say it was, that's what I appreciates about you, Miss Katie. So he just adds S's to the end of everything.
Right. So I would say other than that, I guess I'm sure that somewhere in the series they really develop him out. But for me, I did not think he was essential to the Hick group.
Mm-hmm. I think in the first season he is pretty mild. There's not a lot going on. His pluralizing of things becomes more frequent as the show goes on. He has more of a storyline with Lavina Dick, who is like...
So I was going to ask about that. So do they end up...
They're like kind of off and on for a while. Okay. I think they're together at the end of the show. That she was like the one who got away from him, so they kind of rekindle their romance. He ends up dating a college professor for a while, I believe. Becomes a little bit more of a feminist. So there's some other layers to him as the show goes on.
Well, he speaks feminist, so as he wears a hat that says that, and
that's his thing.
Wants to let people know he speaks feminist. Yeah.
So rounding out the Hicks, we have Derry, who is one of Wayne's best friends from childhood.
I think he's fine too. I think it's funny. Does he end up with the blonde bartender?
He doesn't really end up with anybody. He, in the last season, not to give any spoilers, but he ends up dating a D-Gen for a while and then kind of snaps out of it and comes back to the Hicks. But so he doesn't really, like, nobody really ends up with anybody. It's just kind of vague.
Well, what I would say about him is that he is Wayne's best friend, and he's always there. So if Wayne is going to fight someone, he's there beside him. He's incredibly loyal, and his character is funny. It seems like it's a little bit more of he's got a little bit more of a moral compass. Actually, I think that they all, as crazy as it sounds, I think that they all have a moral compass.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I mean, one of the things that they frequently say is like, if a friend asks for help, you help them. So like, they're very community focused. They're always looking out for each other.
And at one point you have Wayne say he's giving a friend a job and he keeps showing up late, doing a really bad job. And the rest of the Hicks are asking Wayne, why don't you fire him? Why don't you fire him? And Wayne just says, I just try to not kick people when they're down. I try to give everybody a chance that they can. So yeah, I think that they're all good people. Mm-hmm. And I think that they all have their moments where they prove that. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. That pretty much rounds out the Hicks. I can think of a couple other side characters who would probably fall into that category, but I think we'll probably just highlight some of the side characters after we cover all the groups. Let's move on to the Skids. So we have kind of the two main ones in this group. We have Stuart, who is kind of the leader of the Skids, and Roald, who becomes much more of a main character as the show progresses. So you didn't get to see a ton of Roald, but I think you kind of got to see some of Stuart's growth. So thoughts on either of those?
I loved the Skids. I thought they were so funny. The intro to them, I have a note here on the pilot where they're all dancing together in the parking lot outside. And I'm just thinking, these guys, it's the same thing, you know. These guys are so committed. They are sitting here in these emo wigs, dancing and doing. I thought it was so funny. I think Stuart's wig is terrible, but it seems like it's terrible on purpose, which is what makes it so much funnier. Mm-hmm. I did notice he has one season or one episode I saw where he has shorter hair, but his hair goes back and forth. But they make meth, they cook meth, and they sell it to everybody. But it's in a funny way. I hate to say that. I mean, yes, there's an opioid crisis happening in the US right now. But, you know, I just feel that he's I like him. And again, I've only seen 10 episodes, but I like him. And I did have a question for you. Do him and Katie ever have a romantic, because he really likes her and she sticks up for him and is kind to him. She's quite kind to him. I was wondering if that ever materialized.
They do have a thing for a while, either in season 2 or 3. I can't remember where it falls, but kind of at the beginning of the show, she's with Riley and Jonesy, and then that kind of falls by the wayside, and she kind of tells Stuart, get your act cleaned up if you're interested in me. And so he does kind of try to change a little bit, and they are together for a brief period of time, but it doesn't last.
I would say from Roald's perspective, the most I think I saw him was in the finale where he just keeps saying Stuart, like really high pitched in a million different ways. And so I figured that that's something that maybe kind of progresses and just gets more and more absurd and outlandish over the seasons. But yeah, the finale was the most I saw of Roald, and I thought he was a funny character.
I like him a lot. I think he's a good character to pair with Stuart, because he's basically like his hype man. Like, he just really wants Stuart to be successful at whatever he's doing, and he wants to support his friend. So he backs him up all the time. He's always there. I like Roald. He's funny.
He's ride or die.
He's a ride or die, like Emil.
I was going to say like Emil. Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's real Emil energy.
All right, moving on, we have the Christians. So there aren't really a lot of characters that are kind of included in this group. We have Glenn, and then I also just grouped the Dicks in with this too. Let's start with Glenn. So Glenn is played by Jacob Tierney, who is one of the other writers and creators of the show, along with Jared Kiso.
Glenn, to me, it really served Dean from Community vibes.
Yes, that's a great comparison. I hadn't thought of that.
He's a minister that very clearly is closeted and openly talks about lusting after men and so on and so forth, and is always in everyone's business. There is a scene in one of the episodes that you showed me where Riley and Jonesy are chatting with the minister and trying to say, if you're gay, it's okay. We're okay with that. And he just continues to say, I'm not. I am a Community fan. I thought that the Dean did it better, but I understand the humor of the local town minister. And I think in one of the very early episodes in season 1, all of the guys that are at the youth group are looking at men on their phones during the break. So I get the joke that they're making, but I just felt like it was the Dean.
That's fair. I mean, he does lust after Wayne in a similar way that Dean lusted after Jeff. So yeah, that's totally fair. So I threw them into this category because I didn't want to talk about Letterkenny without talking about the Dicks, because they are quite possibly my favorite part of the show. So we have Noah Dick and Anita Dick that are husband and wife, and then they have their 2 daughters, Charity Dick and Chastity Dick. Sam, you got to see a whole episode dedicated to the Dicks, so thoughts on them?
I think they're okay.
So let me first say there were 2 episodes that I had written down that had a heavy storyline focusing on those characters. The second one I think was the better episode, but without the context, it didn't make a lot of sense. So I ended up choosing the first episode so that you could kind of get introduced to them for the first time.
So here's what I would say. I love Anita. I love the wife. She is savage and she comes out of nowhere, and she wears the pants in that relationship, despite the fact that they are a Mennonite family with the traditional roles. And so I liked that.
One of the reasons that I love the Dicks so much, first of all, the writing around them I think is just really funny. The other thing is, from living in the United States, there aren't any big name actors, actresses that much in Letterkenny. I'm not sure from the Canadian side if there are any big celebrities that make appearances, but as far as like people I'm familiar with, it's pretty slim. Anita Dick is played by Sara Wayne Callies, who probably her most famous role, I would argue, is Lori Grimes
from The Walking Dead. Yes, and I didn't recognize her at all.
Completely different type of character, unrecognizable in her glasses and bonnet. So when I found that out, I was just even more obsessed with them. All right, so our last group, rounding out the characters, is the hockey players. So we have Riley and Jonesy, who we've talked about quite a bit so far. We also have the coach, who is probably one of my favorite characters, and we have Shoresy. So Sam, you learned something about Shoresy that you were pretty shocked by. If you want to start with that.
I had no idea that Shoresy was played by Jared Keeso, who plays the main character of Wayne. I had no idea until after I watched it. I think I texted you and said, "Excuse me, is this correct?" So again, maybe I'm just not recognizing things, but yes, Shoresy is Jared Keeso.
For our listeners who may not be aware, Shoresy now has his own spin-off series called Shoresy. The second season of that did come out earlier this year. So if you end up watching and you're a fan of Shoresy and all his ridiculousness, he does have his own show now.
What I've heard is that Shoresy might be even better than Letterkenny, but I have no idea, nothing to base that on. I'm curious as to your thoughts.
I think I'm still a Letterkenny fan over Shoresy. I like Shoresy. I feel like his character is watered down quite a bit in Shoresy. I think he's a really funny character.
I thought that all the hockey players were funny. They would probably be the ones that I would be hanging out with if I was in Letterkenny. Take that for what you will. That probably is all you need to know about me. But yeah, I thought that Jonesy and Riley were cool.
So that wraps up kind of the main group. Sam, are there any side characters that you wanted to share your thoughts on?
I think Gail is fantastic. She's the bartender of the bar in town, and she is just so crass, but so funny. And everybody loves Wayne. Everybody wants Jared Keeso as Wayne. And she says, "You can just call me Kate because I'm going to go straight to your ass." It's just wild. So I really like Gail. She was a highlight for me.
And I also really like McMurray, who I forgot was quite different in season 1. He's just kind of like the motorcycle jerk with sunglasses on the back of his head. There's not a lot
I was to say, I don't even know that I could place him.
So I feel like his character gets better as the show progresses.
I don't even remember him. I know that sounds terrible, but I don't.
No, that's fair. And that was so hard about picking just 10 episodes, and I'm still sticking with the ones that I chose. There's just so much that happens in 12 seasons, as I'm sure you can imagine.
So to recap, the Hicks, the hockey players, the Christian/Mennonites, and the Skids. Rich world, lots of characters. I think, Sarah, we probably should throw it to break.
Sounds great. All right, we are back from break. Today we are talking all things Letterkenny. Before we went to break, we set up the different groups in the town. Let's talk show format. At the beginning of the show, there's a little text that goes across the screen saying there are 5,000 people in Letterkenny. These are their problems. And that is kind of the start to every episode of the show.
What I thought was very interesting is I watch on Hulu. You can skip the intro and it's that title card for 2 seconds. I thought that was a weird option to include. Right? Like who is saying, nope, don't want to read one sentences. I didn't understand that.
Almost all episodes start with a cold open, like most comedy shows do. And for Letterkenny, it usually starts with Wayne saying, you were doing something with your pals the other day, and then it cuts to that conversation between him and whoever else was involved.
It's so sharp, I would say, on these specific topics. And for example, I know that you're going to play one, but a couple that I just wrote down is they have an entire conversation about tearing your scrotum or something like that. And they start talking about the vas deferens, which is so funny because we all remember learning about the vas deferens in high school health class. I've never heard anybody say it again. Another one that I wrote down here was Derry says, men can wear CK1 just like women. And Wayne said, absolutely. It's a unisex fragrance. And then the other one mentions a Gap fragrance, and all of them, it's the record stops. And they say, no, you can't be wearing that. That's not a unisex. It's just funny. Like you would never expect these farmers to be talking about the vas deferens and CK1 being a unisex cologne. It's the juxtaposition is really strong in a way that I liked. I did enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is what has kept me coming back for 12 seasons is the dialogue, the witty banter. It's so fast. It's so good.
They talk so fast that it's impressive. I think that everybody that's involved in this show is really proud to be involved in the show. And I think that comes through in every episode. Everybody is fully committed. And I don't know that that's ever clearer than in these cold opens or in these comeback lines that are so witty and written, and very clearly it is comedy material that they have to deliver super, super fast on timing. And at some point, as I was watching these episodes, I was just thinking, these people are professionals. They're professionals.
Mm-hmm. Just to continue talking about how impressive this is, these are not long episodes. They're about 20, 25 minutes. And so for the amount of dialogue that they have to fit in, they have got to be quick. So this
Gilmore Girls wishes. Gilmore Girls wishes.
Better bundle up in boots, blankets, and balaclavas because a bloody bitter breeze will blow brisk, blustery, and bleak.
Careful.
Correct and common to cocoon in a cap, coat, and comforter because a cutting cold can consume your character, occasionally create a corpse, and continually compress your cock. Don't you dare dawdle dilly-dally your dick around after dark in December. She's definitely damn drafty if you're down a duvet.
Easily.
Each and every earthling's environmentally enslaved.
Fact.
It's fucking freezing. It's friggin' frigid. You're fit for flu in February without fleece, flannel, full-fledged furnace, or fire.
So that's just a quick example of a cold open in the show. From there, most episodes, I would say, start at the produce stand that Wayne and Katie run from their farm. Usually they are hanging out in front of the produce stand with Squirrely Dan and Derry.
Feels like the produce stand is the water cooler of the town. People always come up to the end of the road and are saying, oh, this is what's being said in town, or this is what's going on. And it kind of sets the impetus for the story.
Right. And from there, they get involved in, I would say most of the storylines are single episode storylines, but there are a couple that carry over multiple episodes. In season 1, though, we do have overarching storyline, I would say, with Wayne, where he has recently broken up with his high school sweetheart. They were together for several years. She wasn't really into him fighting, and he was known as the toughest guy in Letterkenny, but he hasn't fought for a while. And so now that he is single, he is looking to kind of regain that title or defend his title. And so over the first few episodes in season 1, we hear people talking about this, people wanting to challenge him. That is a storyline that lasts a little bit longer, but for the most part, everything wraps up in each episode. Were there any standout parts for you? Anything that you really enjoyed in these 10 episodes?
So I would say the first season, I was glad we watched it. It's a lot of world building and character introduction. And again, you can see the growth that happens over just a couple other seasons and episodes. I think let's start with the highlight. The episode that I absolutely loved.
Wait, let me guess.
Okay,
Okay, is it Derry's super soft birthday party?
It's not, although that was a good one as well. For me, it was Chips.
Okay.
And
that's fair.
This is in season 11, episode 1, I think. And the town starts talking about they're voting on their favorite potato chip. So there's a town meeting and they talk about how small towns care about potato chips. This is a really big deal. There's a lot of dialogue and conversation. We have to come together and we have to figure out what the best potato chip is. It's some sort of competition. On my end, I found this to ring incredibly true. I'm originally from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and all anybody ever talks about are the amount and the different varieties of chips that you can get in Lancaster that you cannot get anywhere else. We're talking Hearst chips. We're talking Utz's, Grandma Utz's kettle cooked. It's not just your Lay's and your Doritos and your tortilla chips. There are all of these small chip producers and a variety of different flavors. So from the jump, the premise of it really rang true to me. And I was really excited to see what they did with it.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that I chose that episode is because it's a really good example of these like town meetings where decisions are being made. And again, the banter that is used in the show. So plus, again, I also grew up in a small town. Snyder's was the chip in our area, so I definitely have my loyalties and I understand the animosity that some people feel against certain chip flavors.
They go in depth and they talk about all these different flavors. And what's so funny is each person has this chip that they're fighting for. And they, at the end, when the debate's really going, they each take their turn saying, I need to get some air. I need to walk out of here and get some air. I need to calm down. And talking about potato chips. The flavors that they're talking about are plain, salt and vinegar, dill pickle, ketchup, and then there is an aside and there is a run on Pringles that just to me is very, very, very smart and sharp and really kind of developed out. But if we can, and it's a little bit of an audible here, but I want to play Stuart's rebuttal to salt and vinegar chips.
Okay.
Because I love salt and vinegar chips.
I'd probably go with salt and vinegar as well.
Or the hive mind on the salt and vinegar chips. They start with plain, and Derry really is very adamant that plain doesn't get its due. And Wayne comes in and says there were 2 ingredients that we would add to a plain chip to make it better. And that was salt and that was vinegar. And so then we get into people talking about salt and vinegar. And Stuart's response, though, again, it's really based in real life. I would love to play it.
Shall I just say what everyone is thinking? Sure, that chip is inconsistent.
You son of a bitch.
You never know which one you're getting. And that's the problem. You're pulling out one that's maybe a little too salt and vinegary. Next thing you know, you've got one that's not very salt and vinegary at all. One's got enough salt and vinegar to prune your lips for the better part of 48 hours. The next one may as well be...
Don't you dare.
Regular.
I think that is true. I like the Hershey salt and vinegar chips, and sometimes I don't get salt and vinegar chips at the store because a lot of times the salt and vinegar is just a normal potato chip. So I thought that was sharp commentary from Stuart.
Agreed.
They end up deciding that all dressed chips, which is a mix of all of it, which is, I guess, lore in the show, is the best chip. And Squirrely Dan says it's the Bret Hart of chips. It's the best there is, best there was, and best there ever will be. Sarah, I wanted to dig into that for a second because you know I love professional wrestling. Did you know the reference? Did you know he was talking about Bret Hart?
I did not.
So Bret Hart, which is what makes it so hilarious, is Canada's most famous professional wrestler. He was huge in the 90s. He was in WWE, fought Shawn Michaels, all that. Then he went over to WCW where your boy Goldberg actually injured him and ended his career. His entire gimmick was that he was Canadian. So I just thought it was funny that this little rural town in Letterkenny of 5,000 people in Canada would obviously talk about Bret Hart and the chips.
Of course they would.
I appreciated it. I'm just going to share the clip real quick. It's only about 4 seconds.
I am the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
It was a nice callback.
Sam, have you had all dressed chips?
No, I didn't think that they were a real thing.
I'm not sure, and I guess I'll probably have to fact check this. The voodoo chips, I don't know if those would be considered all dressed, but they are essentially salt and vinegar, barbecue, all of those flavors mixed together. That's what I was imagining. It's the best of everything, so why wouldn't you go with those?
I think the voodoo chips are okay. I always think that they're Cajun, though. It was at this point, I made a note here, Sarah, where I said Letterkenny is Seinfeld, but set in rural Canada.
That's fair. I've not watched Seinfeld, but I know some of the gags. So I think that's a fair comparison.
It's the discussion of the minutia, and it's being really expert in lasering in on something. And so I got excited because when I kind of cracked and figured out what it was, yes, I like it because Seinfeld's my favorite sitcom. But it also made me excited for our Seinfeld one that we do in the future because I think you will enjoy it if you like Letterkenny. I think that there were some similarities there.
Yeah, I am excited about it. It's one of those shows that people keep asking me if I've watched, and at this point I'm like, I just need to get to it because I feel like I'm missing so many gags, so many jokes, so I just need to make it happen. I did want to hear your thoughts about how the series finale tied everything together. As I said, I chose that episode intentionally because I felt like for a show that is ending, it did an excellent job of throwing it back to some of the plot points in season 1, bringing some of those gags back, and just kind of wrapping up all of the characters' storylines in a nice way. I know you're missing like the middle pieces, but from seeing both sides of the show, your thoughts on the...
Yeah, I was a little intimidated, honestly, to realize I was watching the series finale as one of the episodes, just because, yeah, you worry if you're going to be missing a lot of things. My perception of it was that it was really well done with care. It seemed that all of the characters had a moment, were able to connect with each other. It was fun to see some of the gags brought back from season 1. I do have a note here that says nice callbacks in the finale from season 1. And I can only imagine that there are so many more that I didn't get because I didn't watch the entirety of the series. But it was during that series finale where I really my takeaway was that the people really cared about being on this show. And it felt like a celebratory send-off, and it felt satisfying to me, again, as somebody that really was cherry picking just a handful of episodes. So I can only imagine for you and or the people that have watched it the whole way through that it was satisfying.
I truly feel that of the shows that I watched, it was one of the best finales that I've seen in terms of bringing everything to an end. I'm not gonna lie, I teared up. There's like a montage at the end where they're just showing all of the locations. And I did tear up, like, this is it. I can't believe this is over. So I, as a fan who has watched all of the episodes, I would say I was very pleased with how things ended. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our discussion about Letterkenny. So let's close it out. Sam, can you give our listeners a quick 30-second review of the 10 episodes that you've seen so far?
Yes. I think it takes a little bit to get going. What I will say is there is a very, very specific type of comedy here. It's a very specific and cultivated voice, and they really know the humor that they're telling. I think when I look at What We Do in the Shadows and Knowing Jermaine Clement, I think it's similar. I understand why you like both of these shows, but to me, Letterkenny was a little bit easier to get into, and I do appreciate the fastness of the dialogue. So it's not necessarily a review of the show, but just some thoughts that I have.
Right. I think Letterkenny, it knows what it wants and is doing from the very beginning, and that is consistent throughout the show. Yes, there are character changes. Yes, there are plot changes. But for the most part, like, the way it starts is kind of the way it ends. It's very consistent.
It seems to me like Jared Kiso has a lot of confidence, and he's going to put out exactly what he wanted. And I think Letterkenny is exactly what he wanted to put out. And there's something to me that's attractive and makes me want to watch. One thing that I do want to say is I think at the beginning in the cold open, or right after the cold open, when they lay out what the episode is, they're going, as I said, to commit to that for the entirety of the episode. And I do feel in some areas that it does depend on if you like the type of humor that is going to be presented during that specific episode, because they're going to rail that into the ground no matter what. To the point we talked about, really worked for me on Chips, because we would have this conversation about Chips, Sara. And that makes sense. It makes sense on Derry's soft birthday, where they try to pick the softest things and the birthday. That was really funny. Some areas that did not work for me. I did not like Fart Book. I thought it was gross. I tend to not like bathroom humor in general. I tend to feel like that's the lowest form of humor. So it was 30 minutes of puns and talking about farts and so on and so forth. And for me, that was a skipper. And then I will say on the Dicks episode, which I do want to give you a chance to redeem it, because like you said, you think the second one's better. I just felt like it was thin. I think it ran thin. Okay, we're just going to be talking and doing puns about dicks and a hard dick and a blah, blah, blah. And they're stubborn dicks and it's chastity dick and I need a dick and I need a... Okay, 30 minutes of it for me ran a little bit thin. So I think that it's not enough to turn me off from the series at all, but I do think that if you're not in, like any stand-up comedy that you go to, if you're not in on the type of humor that they're focusing on in that episode, it can be not as enjoyable of an experience, I would say.
Right. I think that's fair. And I think you get a feel pretty early on. So, you know, if you're watching an episode, it's probably pretty easy to tell if you're not interested. That would be one that you could just go ahead and move on to the next one and not miss a whole lot of the overall plot of the show. So you would recommend it to others, maybe depending on their specific interests in humor and comedy?
I would say flat out, I would recommend it to somebody else. Absolutely. I would tell them, I don't think you have to start at season 1. I think you could just kind of pick around a couple different ones.
Right. I think that's fair. You could probably just pick and choose the ones that you're interested in. Usually when I watch Letterkenny, it's almost a background show for me. So I'll put it on while I'm doing something. If it's an episode or a storyline I'm really interested, I'll stop what I'm doing. If not, I'll just like continue cleaning or cooking or whatever it is. And I can kind of zone out a little bit if I need to.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is whether you like the topic that they're talking about or not, I could still appreciate the wit, the delivery, the speed, the humor. I would totally recommend it. Totally recommend it.
Awesome. So before we wrap it up, Sam, can you compare it to a Little Debbie snack cake?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm terrible because I do this all the time and I don't really mean to, but I would have picked the strawberry shortcake roll that we talked about at the beginning of the episode because I think it's a nice treat. I think I can consume it, feel good about consuming it. Let me put it this way. If I would have gotten onto it when it started, I likely would have watched it every season that it was on, just like you did. And me thinking that the strawberry shortcake rolls just came out 5 years ago and they've really been a staple for 50 years. So I would do that. But yeah, it's nice. It's seasonal. It's fluffy. It's a feel-good show, which kind of sounds crazy to say, but I do think that that's true.
For me, Letterkenny is an oatmeal cream pie, which is one of my favorite Little Debbie snack cakes, but not one that I seek out a lot. When I do, I consume it in large quantities. I would say Letterkenny it's not The Office for me. It's not something that I just need to either fall asleep or feel comfortable. I'm going to put on this show that makes me feel those things. It is something that I'll think, oh, I haven't watched Letterkenny in a while. I just thought of this really funny storyline. I'm going to go back and revisit it. Or the new season just came out. I'm going to revisit some of my favorites. So it's kind of sporadic, and I feel like that's how I am with the oatmeal cream pies.
I spoiled it earlier in the episode, but I do think that I will mosey on and take my time watching. The nice thing is, as we've said, they're just 6-episode seasons. So yeah. I think, to your point, exactly how I watched these first 10, I watched it over a span of 2 or 3 days. I might do that again and just finish the series on my own time. I do want to check out Shoresy, though, because if that's just at the beginning, that is something that I feel like I could get into as long as it goes. And knowing that Jared Kiso is Shoresy changes the game for me, because I guess I'm an idiot. Did you know that looking at Shoresy?
Not looking at him, but I knew it was his voice, at least.
Yeah, I'm an idiot.
I mean, because really, like, all that we see of Shoresy is his back and his butt. So, like, it literally could have been anybody. They could have put anybody in that role, but the dialogue voiceover, I could tell, was Jared Kiso. So that wraps up our Letterkenny episode. This was a lot of fun. I had so much fun talking about it.
I really did enjoy this, Sarah. It took me a little bit to get my bearings, but again, a great pick, as always. And I understand your sense of humor more now through this. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. So thank you. Always. Thank you, Sarah. You picked some good ones.
One of the reasons we started this podcast.
You also pick some bad ones. But
listen, Sam, my goal is to educate you on the topics that I think will win you a trivia competition someday.
Well, here's the thing. None of your recommendations are outside of the center of culture. And you're right. They are things that I should know. Thank you so much for listening. If you are a Letterkenny fan, please let us know. Reach out to us on Instagram at FauxFamPod or shoot us an email at foreignfamiliarpod@gmail.com.
We'll be back next week with another stellar episode.
Thanks for eavesdropping on us.
If you can't get enough of the Cousin Chronicles, head over to Instagram and follow at FauxFamPod for more in-depth info and behind-the-scenes details.
Or email us at foreignfamiliarpod@gmail.com.
Foreign and Familiar is a Flynn & Flynn production.
The theme is Colorful by Allerlie von Nicolai.